Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. DrAndyRoark. Guys, I got, such a great episode for you. It's one of my favorite episodes in a while. I know I say every episode is a great episode. They generally are pretty darn good episodes. I really have been blessed to have great guests come on. But today, I've just got one that I really, really love. It's my friend, Dr. Doug Mader. He is an exotic animal veterinarian. You'll hear me gush about him when he comes on. But he is such a storyteller. He's talking about zoonosis today. Man, if this is how zoonotic diseases were taught in vet school, I would have been a straight A student in parasitology and in zoonosis. It's such a fun episode. We talk about sewage turtles and typhoid Mary and one-eyed cold and weight loss tapeworms and just all kinds of incredible stories on our way to discussing real zoonotic disease considerations when we're seeing exotic pets. So anyway, guys, this is such a wonderful blend of practical, pragmatic medicine that's great for doctors, technicians, assistants, pet owners, and also just really interesting facts and stories that just make it so I can keep talking to Doug all day. Anyway, I've gushed and swooned enough. Let's get into this episode with Dr. Doug Mader.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Doug Mader. Thank you for being here, my friend.
Oh, Andy, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate the honor to be invited back.
You were so kind and humble. You've been a mentor of mine for a long time. You're someone I've always respected. One, for your work in vet medicine, and two, you are an accomplished writer. Your book, The Vet and Noah's Ark, is one that I always recommend when people say, what are your favorite books about veterinary medicine, especially for pet owners? You talk about being an exotic animal vet in Los Angeles during the time of the LA riots in the 90s, which I remember. You write basically in a series of short stories. And so I always enjoy your stuff. It's stuff I can sit down and read a story or two. And so anyway, I appreciate you being here. You are triple boarded. You are mostly known for exotic animal medicine. You have written, I think, 3 textbooks. You have won the Speaker of the Year award at VMX probably more times than you can count, and at Western Vet. You were just such an accomplished speaker and presenter. You are so matter of fact, and I think that's one thing I've always really admired about you, and it's something that I, as a presenter, have really tried to take away is you're very matter of fact. You very much get down to what veterinarians actually see, and you're direct of, look out for this, make sure you're doing that, make sure you don't mess up this way. And you were someone I deeply enjoyed learning from. And so I've just watched what you put out and what you write and things. And I've seen you writing recently about zoonotic disease is stuff that has sort of come up. And I wanted to sort of bring you and ask you about it because this is something that is sort of a hot topic. I think a lot of it comes from leptospirosis recently. ACVIM just did a position statement in 2023 about leptospirosis and zoonosis. And so it kind of put zoonosis back on my radar. And then I was looking and reading from you, and you were talking about zoonosis in a very practical way that I don't think a lot of people think about. And so let me just kind of stop there before we get into specifics and sort of open it up and say, zoonotic disease, what are veterinarians sort of missing? What are the things that you think get lost in these conversations?
All right, that's a super good point. Thank you for the kind words in the intro. I appreciate that. For the sake of getting back to the very, very basics, for those of you that are beginning listeners, a zoonotic disease is a disease that people can catch from animals. You know, one of the classic diseases that we've all learned about since we were little teeny kids is something like rabies. And rabies in certain parts of the country is a serious, serious issue because it lives endemically in certain wildlife populations like raccoons, foxes, skunks, and things like that. And there are certain places where people are allowed to keep those as pets. Fortunately, is not a huge issue as a zoonotic disease here in this country, but it's one of the, I think if it's not number one, it's in the top few killers of zoonotic diseases in people in the entire world. Wow. You know, and I just got back from Africa, and it is a huge, huge issue there because they don't vaccinate down there and prevent it. But that brings up the point of zoonotic diseases about other pets that we work with. And you know, I do a lot of work with exotics, and there's a lot of misconceptions. So giving me this platform to share some of those with our listeners, I think is really important. So we can clarify some really important things. And also, I want to share this with you because I know there's a lot of veterinarians and veterinary assistants and nurses out there, and you need to be aware of this because for legal reasons in today's country, if you don't cross all your T's and dot all your I's and say something incorrectly, it could come back to bite you. So I think one of the big ones that I see a lot of, and I've actually been involved as an expert witness for the AVMA on a few malpractice cases, is salmonella. And I know you've heard about it. You know, it's one of those diseases that when you say salmonellosis, the first thing you think of is, reptiles. Okay. And that's legit because that's where it kind of came to the forefront. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, I know some of our listeners weren't born then, but it's important to know where this started. There was the pet store, they were selling, the pet trade sold these little things called penny turtles. And I don't know if you remember them. They were red.
I remember. Yeah, well, they used to sell them beside the road in Florida. You know, they have the little plastic terrariums and the little red sliders, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And they were selling them across the country in Ben Franklin stores, Crest, Five and Dimes. And they became so popular that foreign countries, especially China, wanted to get them. And they were buying them as pets, supposedly as pets. And the interesting thing is how they were raised. Because they are in such popular demand, these people in Louisiana had these large sewage ponds where they recycled human waste. And they found that the turtles were thriving in the human sewage ponds and they didn't have to feed them because the turtles were just eating basically human feces in the sewage ponds. You can imagine living in a sewage pond, what diseases you're going to pick up. Well, the big one was salmonellosis. And so they were selling these baby penny turtles all around the country. And back in the early 70s, they were having up to 300,000 cases a year in children. And finally, in 1975, the USDA got wise and said, hey, wait a minute. We're selling baby turtles that are grown up in sewage ponds in the pet trade, and kids are getting sick. Duh. You know, what's wrong with this picture? So in 1975, USDA put the ban on the sale of pet turtles less than 4 inches in length or any live turtle eggs. And it's funny because the reason they picked less than 4 inches of length is because somebody did a study and they measured the mouth size on children. And they figured anything bigger than 4 inches, they wouldn't be able to put it in their mouth. Kids tend to do that. Well, it worked because it cut the cases of salmonella way down, but it doesn't stop the fact that kids still play with the turtle and then eat their peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But it did bring up, and it educated the public about the disease and the fact that they basically cut out the sale of the baby turtles, pretty much, I wouldn't say stop the disease, but stop the problem that they were having. But they were still allowed to export them to China. So that's still an issue, and it's actually still being done. So that's kind of where it all started. And the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians, they got together with the CDC and came out with a white paper. And the white paper states basically that you should just assume that every reptile, not just baby turtles, every reptile carries salmonella. There's over 2,400 serotypes of salmonellosis, and there's been well over 200 documented serotypes that our reptiles carry. And basically, all 200 plus serotypes that the reptiles carry are potentially zoonotic to humans. So it's a legitimate concern, okay? Now, I don't want everybody to go out and flush their reptiles down the toilet. That's the last thing in the world we want to do. So what we want to do is just kind of put it in perspective. I can guarantee you that I have probably had salmonellosis in my career. I don't ever remember having it. Okay. But I work with pet turtles, I work with alligators, I work with crocodiles, I work with large tortoises, large sea turtles, and I'm exposed to it on a regular basis. If you're healthy and what they call immunocompetent, most likely if you get salmonella, you're going to get diarrhea for 2 or 3 days, and usually it's self-limiting, it goes away. And most of us don't run to the doctor every time we get diarrhea because we just wait till it clears, and it does. And that you may have had it, and it's that simple. Now, there is an at-risk population, and children under 5, the written guidelines are children under 5, seniors over 65, pregnant women, people that are on immunosuppressive drugs like prednisone or chemotherapy, people that have immunosuppressive diseases such as HIV, they're much more susceptible to salmonella or any other potential infectious disease. So those groups, what I would encourage them to do, I would never discourage them from keeping them as pets because that human-animal bond is priceless. Everybody needs that. But I would encourage them to talk to their veterinarian and also talk to their human physician, and have your veterinarian's card with you when you talk to your physician and say, please call my vet and talk to them about it. Because human doctors, they just want you to get rid of everything.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on prednisone, get rid of your bird. Well, I've had the bird for 30 years. It's dangerous, get rid of it. I've had the snake for 25 years. Oh, we'll get rid of it. And you don't need to do that. You just need to be educated. The key is, with any of these zoonotic diseases, is hygiene. You walk into any public restroom in a restaurant, and what's the sign that you see on the mirror in every single restroom?
Yeah.
Employees watch your hands, right? Same common sense. If you have pets at home, and I don't care if it's a reptile or something else. And Andy, did you know that dogs carry it, cats carry it, birds can carry salmonella, cockroaches carry salmonella? I live down here in the Florida Keys, and we have those cute little hermit crabs. Hermit crabs carry salmonella. Seagulls carry salmonella. Salmonella, because there's so many serotypes, is carried by many, many, many different species. And we are potentially susceptible to any one of those.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like I said, people will have it and they can carry it and they may not even show signs. Or if they do, they're so mild, it doesn't dawn on them that they're not feeling good. I think the classic story is Typhoid Mary. And she was a food worker. And I believe she ended up, there were like 50 deaths associated with this one person working in a kitchen before they finally figured out that she was the one spreading the disease. So it is transmitted by fecal oral contamination. So that's why you're not supposed to put baby turtles in your mouth. And just like the signs in the restaurants, if you're playing with your pet turtle or your hamster or whatever pet you might have, dog or cat, use common sense. Wash your hands before you go and make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich or eat the Kentucky Fried Chicken that's finger looking good. Simple common sense. Yeah. Other things like we don't clean out the turtle bowl in the kitchen sink where we prepare human food.
Right.
Simple things like that can make all the difference in the world. I think people need to realize that. Now, the other thing is too, and this is very important, this is getting more on the technical side for the veterinarians and the veterinary technicians and nurses. And that is, we walk a really fine line when it comes to a lot of the animals that we deal with. I'm sure you've heard of this movement called the antibiotic stewardship movement, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the concept is that we don't want to just throw antibiotics at anything that's not feeling good because we're too dumb enough to figure out what it is, or we're too lazy enough to do diagnostics, or we think our clients don't want to spend the money. We should always offer the 5-star, the gold standard. And if the clients can't do it, then we need to do a workaround. In a perfect world with antibiotic stewardship, we don't really want to put an animal on an antibiotic if we don't know what it has, because bacteria, and we're talking about salmonella right now, have an ability to form resistant forms. And salmonella is notorious for developing antibiotic resistance, notorious for it. And so we as veterinarians, let's say, and I'm going to share this case with you because this is an actual case. One of my cases that I helped the AVMA with, some owner, and they had a small child, a 5-year-old child. They had a pet Savannah monitor, which is a kind of a small to medium-sized lizard. Really common monitor, very, very friendly, and make really good pets. And the monitor squirms around the house and runs around on the floor. And a little 5-year-old runs around on the floor, plays with the monitor, crawls on his hands and knees, pets the monitor. And the monitors are great. They make really good pets. And then sadly, the child got sick. As it turns out, the owner had taken the monitor to the veterinarian, and the monitor was having diarrhea. And so the veterinarian sent the monitor home on a drug called Baytril, which, enrofloxacin, very commonly used drug in veterinary medicine. The monitor had developed, it turns out, hindsight's always 20/20, it turned out that the monitor had salmonellosis, and then the child got salmonellosis. But the problem was that the vet never had cultured the monitor, never figured out what it was. They just randomly put him on Baytril. The monitor developed a sensitivity to the enrofloxacin, which cross-reacts with the ciprofloxacin that they use in humans. And so the child ended up getting salmonellosis from handling the monitor. And when they went to test the child, it actually got a meningitis. It got pretty sick. They cultured the CSF, and it had fluoroquinolone-resistant salmonellosis.
Oh, wow.
And so they couldn't use the ciprofloxacin. So they ended up, I think if I recall the case correctly, they ended up treating it, believe it or not, with IV chloramphenicol. And that's something that they don't even learn in school anymore.
Yeah.
But the child did fine. It healed up perfectly. Everything went fine. But the owners turned around and sued the veterinarian because it was determined, because they cultured the lizard, they cultured the meningitis, and it was the same serotype. So they determined that the child got it from the vet. And of course, they sued the vet because the vet put him on an antibiotic that created the resistant bacteria, and never once discussed zoonotic diseases with the owner and the 5-year-old child.
Wow.
And you can see how that whole thing could have been prevented being thorough.
Yeah. A conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And even something as simple, and we used to do this all the time, was just have handouts, how to care for your pet monitor, how to feed your pet monitor, diseases carried by pet monitor that could potentially affect humans, This is what you should do, and always contact your physician. Little handouts like that you give to the clients, you document it in the record. Clients given, a new pet handout kit, and all that kind of stuff will protect yourself. And then if the client turns down the culture and sensitivity, you can say, well, they were warned. And, we told them about potential for resistant organisms. We told them about the potential and the necessity for washing your hands. And they chose to ignore all of our advice, puts it back in their case. But, and of course, in that situation, the veterinarian did lose at the board. It's an easy thing to prevent. It just takes a tiny bit of effort.
Yeah, that's tough. I have got some huge news. My new card game is out. That's right. If you were a fan of the last card game that me and my team made, it was called What's on My Scrubs. You're going to love our brand new card game. It's called Dr. Know-It-All. It is a trivia game meant to be played in teams. It's a mixture of trivia and BS, and it is guaranteed to make your team laugh. All of the questions are meant to be challenging for your whole team. They are based on the difficulty level of the VTNE exam. So this is the Veterinary Technician National Examination. It is great to play with your veterinarians. It doesn't need your veterinarians. It can be toned up and down in difficulty. We have a number of different ways to play the game so that if you have a newer team or a team that is learning, we can tone the game down very quickly and make it fun and engaging and educational for them. And if you have got a bunch of vets that want to go hard in the paint, we can go hard in the paint. The game is made to turn up to that level. It's really flexible that way. It is going to be fun and your people are going to enjoy it. It is made to be played in small teams. That's the team building part. It's just like regular trivia when you go to the restaurant or the bar. And so it is perfect to be played in 5-minute bursts. You can put it at the beginning of your staff meetings just to make people laugh. You can do a couple of rounds of trivia and then get into your business. Or you can just say, hey guys, we're going to have a team meeting. We're just going to do some trivia. And then everybody's going to leave with a smile on their face. I wanted to make that for you. I had such a great time with our first game. I think this game is going to be really fantastic. I think people are going to really love it. Head over to DrAndyRoark.com right now to learn all about it and get your copy sent to either you or your practice. Let's get back into this episode. Do you feel like there are other sort of zoonotic diseases that are sort of attributed to exotics that maybe unfairly so tied to those species? Does that make sense?
I think the next one that we see, and I don't see it as much, I don't think in general we see it as much now as we did before when they were, I go back a long time, and in Southern California, there used to be a lot of birds that were imported, and a lot of them were smuggled across the border from Mexico, and we would frequently see psittacosis. And psittacosis, it goes by a bunch of different names. Psittacosis is caused by Chlamydia psittaci, and in humans, it's called psittacosis if the person gets it from a psittacine, like a macaw. It's called ornithosis if they get it from something like a dove. So the name changes depending on the origin of the disease, but it's the same disease, and it's a bacterium called Chlamydia psittaci. And oftentimes, there are some species where they don't really show signs. They don't show signs that they're sick. Chickens, ducks, a lot of the smaller birds, the passerines, don't show real signs that they're sick with psittacosis, whereas some of the larger psittacines, they get the infamous one-eyed cold, they call it, or they get the tracheitis, the bronchitis, they can develop into pneumonia. And psittacosis...
Why do they call it the one-eyed cold?
Because frequently, especially in things like cockatiels, they get a conjunctivitis, and for some reason, it seems to affect one eye. And so the bird will be there and have a real swollen eye, and the other eye will look normal. And so the breeders, they nicknamed it the one-eyed cold. So that's where that came from. And again, oftentimes some of these birds are carriers, and you can get it fairly casual contact, and it's spread through the feces that are dried out and then aerosolized, or it's spread through things like feather dander. So if you have a bird that's fluffing up and preening and fluffs itself and dander flies everywhere and you inhale it, it's spread via the lungs. Okay. And There's even some belief that it can be spread possibly by fecal-oral contamination if you're cleaning cages from birds that are sick, and then you contaminate yourself that way. But the big thing is just the respiratory component to it. So, again, that's reasonably easy to test for. There are ELISAs, fluorescent antibody tests, PCR tests, of course, cultures that can be done. They can run up a fairly good size bill if you do all those different tests. But I strongly recommend that anybody that gets a new bird, make sure that when they buy the bird, they get it with a vet warranty that, okay, you have 5 days to take it to your veterinarian and have it tested. And psittacosis is certainly one of the things that's easily testable. And I think every bird should be tested for it. And again, fortunately, the rules have changed. You don't see as much imports anymore. Where I used to see probably 2 or 3 cases a week back in Southern California, now it's not that common. If I see one a month, that's pushing it.
Wow.
Now, some of the big bird vets may see more, but I still see quite a few birds, and it's not that common. It's one of those diseases in humans that if you get it, most humans, again, if you're in the immunocompetent group, which means you're healthy, you might get the chills or a little cough or the sniffle or a head cold, and then self-limiting. But if you're in one of the at-risk groups, it could turn into fulminant pneumonia and potentially be lethal. So
Wow.
it's nothing to, no joke intended, nothing to sneeze at. Don't take it lightly. It's a serious consideration. So especially when you're dealing with birds from an unknown source. Oh, hey, I've got this bird I'm selling out of my trunk. Come in, look at it.
Right. Yeah. The old swap meet bird. Yeah.
Oh, back in the days, man, when they had the swap meets and the birds are coming from Mexico, they would paint them. And
What?
I would not uncommonly, I would see these Amazons come in and they would be painted pink or they'd be painted light purple, or even one day I had one come in, it was spray painted gold, and people would buy these birds. Why in the world they would buy something like that, I have no idea, but they would.
They would sell spray painted birds? I mean,
Yeah.
I thought,
people
so
would buy them.
I assumed that would be so toxic to the bird, right? Like the fumes from paint and things like that.
It is extremely, and don't try this at home. Please don't do that. But it's amazing how people would see a completely blue or completely pink, rare pink bird parrot from Mexico, and they would buy it. Absolutely boggled my mind.
I saw you writing recently. You were talking about sort of parasites in exotic animals. Talk to me a little bit about the dwarf tapeworm.
Oh yeah, that's another one. Dwarf tapeworm is a tapeworm that's carried mostly in like rats and mice and smaller rodents like that. Hymenalepsis nana, Hymenalepsis diminuta, the two common names. But dwarf tapeworm is all you need to know, and it's infectious to people. Now, what's interesting is that if you have one of these rats, oftentimes you don't see proglottids in the feces like you do like in a dog or a cat that has tapeworms. And everybody knows that, the owner comes in with the rice that are in the poop. Oh, you don't see that with this. So what ends up happening is that people have these pets, again, they clean their cages, they use common sense, they don't wash their hands. And then there's a direct contamination with contaminated feces. Or in the case of like diminuta, they actually have to have an intermediate host. But with Nana, there can be direct contamination, and then fecal-oral contamination, the people can get the tapeworms too. Used to be years and years and years ago, it wasn't true, but the story is true. You could actually go on the catalogs and you could buy tapeworms, and it was a method that people would use for weight loss. They say, well, if you take the tapeworms, you eat them, you would lose your weight. When you get down to the weight to where you want to be, then you go to see your doctor, they gave you a pill, you kill the tapeworm, and then boom, you've lost the weight, and you didn't have to change your diet. Well, that wasn't true. It's not true now, but they used to sell them. And if you Google it, you can actually see the old time ads where people could buy therapeutic tapeworms. Wow. So people that have rats and mice and pets like that, they don't lose weight. But typically what happens is oftentimes you might get stomach pains, you might get borborygmus, sometimes you might develop diarrhea. If you get a heavy enough load of tapeworms, it can certainly cause fever. And if you get sick enough, you're not going to eat. So if you don't eat, you're going to lose weight. But you don't lose weight directly because the tapeworms compete with the nutrients. You lose weight because you're sick with a parasite. Fortunately, in humans, it's, again, literally taking a pill, and just like with a dog, and then it kills the parasite and it's gone. But it's not super common in purpose-bred rats and mice. But if you have a situation where rats that live outside or mice that live outside can get into your food, where you store your food, and contaminates the food that you feed your pet rat, then certainly it's a possibility. Some other things that we need to think about: mites. There are several species of mites. There's actually documented cases of people getting mites from pet snakes. And the mites won't breed on you because you're not a definitive host, but they'll bite you and they'll suck your blood and suck your lymph, and they can cause a nasty rash. There are mites that, of course, everybody's familiar with Sarcoptes in cats, right? Mm-hmm. And mange that people can get. Rabbits can carry several different species of mites that people can catch. Certainly, there's a lot of lice. Now, most lice are very species specific. So if you have a guinea pig that's covered with lice and the child brings it home or has it, the lice could jump on the person. But again, they're highly species specific, so the lice will usually fall off. So just be aware of some of those things. There are other things. We talked about salmonella, but there's other bacteria too, like Campylobacter can certainly cause diarrhea, and that's carried by a number of different species. Mm-hmm. And whereas salmonella, usually if you're exposed to it 12 to 24 hours, you're going to show signs. Can't be, because sometimes can take 2 to 3 days. And so oftentimes the person gets diarrhea and they forgot, oh yeah, 4 days ago I played with somebody's pet hamster. So some of these diseases are a little bit harder to find. Again, if you look it up, there's dozens of different types of zoonotic diseases that we can get from our pets. And again, it's not just exotics, it's dogs and cats as well.
We're going to run out of time here. Doug, I could listen to you tell stories all day. I mean, just sewage turtles, typhoid Mary, the one-eyed cold. It's amazing. Final thoughts here, parting words. You talked about a lot of different diseases. If there's one thing that you could sort of stress to veterinarians, nurses, assistants, what would be sort of your parting thought?
Hey, Andy, that's a great question. The reason I get up in the morning, and I've been doing this for 4 decades, is the human-animal bond. My goal when I get up in the morning is I want to promote and prolong the human-animal bond as best as I possibly can. And so here we just spent all this time talking about diseases we can catch from animals. I don't want that to scare people. Yeah. Because you can get a lot more diseases and get a lot sicker by hanging out with people than you can with a lot of these animals. How many times have you shaken somebody's hand, gone to the movies, sit on an airplane, and then you get sick? So don't be afraid of all these different diseases. The thing is, just be educated, use common sense, good hygiene. I can't stress that enough. Put up signs in your exam rooms, put up signs in your treatment rooms, wear gloves when appropriate, wash your hands. Knock on wood. I'm one of these types of people that rarely get sick, but I also one of these people, I probably wash my hands 40, 50 times a day. Yeah. Everything I do, I'm washing my hands as soon as I'm done doing it. And that's a huge key, just to keep from passing on diseases. And anybody that works in the healthcare field or the animal field in general, I don't care if you work in a dairy farm, a chicken farm, and a pet store, or a veterinary office, just use common sense, wash your hands frequently, wear gloves when possible, keep areas disinfected, don't mix animal food with people food, don't clean animal cages where you make human food, don't store animal parts in a human refrigerator where you have human food. Common sense, which a lot of people lack, but common sense goes a long way.
That's outstanding. Doug, where can people find you online?
Oh, I have a website. It's a real easy one to remember. It's just dougmader.com. And from there, if you're interested in some of my non-technical writing, my Vet at Noah's Ark, my novel, has done extremely well. I'm very humbled at the reception it's gotten. It's won several awards. And that's available online through my website, or you can go to amazon.com and get it. I'm also on social media on Facebook and Instagram.
Outstanding. Guys, thanks so much for listening, everybody. Thanks to Doug Mader for being here. Take care of yourselves, gang. We'll talk to you later on. All right, guys, that's what I got for you. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Doug Mader for being on. Guys, I said this at the beginning, too. His book, The Vet at Noah's Ark, is really a good book. Yeah, I've given it as gifts. It is a neat book for people who think veterinary medicine is really interesting. I was asked by PBS when the All Creatures Great and Small show was out, if there was a book about veterinary medicine that I would recommend to viewers of the show. It was really hard because there's a lot of really good books. All Dogs Go to Kevin by Dr. Jessica Vogelsang is one of my favorites. Lucky Dog by Dr. Sarah Boston is another great one. I know I'm forgetting something. I'm going to deeply offend somebody or hurt their feelings. I've got a list. Gave them a couple and they said, no, we need one. And I gave them Doug's book, The Vet at Noah's Ark. And it's just because it's really it's a neat story about exotic animal medicine. I think a lot of vets, we know what we do in our job. It's interesting to see someone who practices a totally different type of medicine. But also the backdrop of the LA riots in the 1990s is just a really interesting place for him to tell the story. And I don't know, there's just a lot to it. So anyway, if you're a reader out there and you want something good to pick up, check out his book. Gang, that's enough from me. Take care of yourselves, everybody. I'll talk to you later.